Alright guys, so for this part we've got our low poly. We've been working on trying to get this thing reduced, get it something where it's more game ready. And we're kind of at the point where we have our low poly model at least close to what we want. Um, and it's time to kind of start thinking about UVs. And before we start laying out the UVs, what we want to do is kind of think about how to make the best use of our texture space. So I went ahead, took our model, and just did a real quick automatic UV map and kind of laid some stuff out. And this is very unoptimized, but you can see where the major shapes, okay, of the object kind of are. Some of this needs to be rescaled or whatever, but overall you can see there's a lot of different shells, there's a lot of different parts and pieces. While we can kind of understand what's going on a little bit on this, it's a little confusing. So ideally we would reduce this down and all. But there's one thing I want to look at, and that is talking about optimizing texture space. And one of the best things that we can do with this model for optimizing texture space is use some repetition. So have an area of the model repeat, okay, as far as the texture information, so that we can get more resolution on the smaller space. So looking at this model, we have 4 spaces around here, and at any particular point in time we can only see 2 of them, but we have 4 faces on here, 4 up here. We've got these cylinder objects at the top and at the bottom. We have this object here which has a face, but I don't even think we're going to need the back face here. If we do include this face and keep it, we can make it very, very small because I don't think anybody will ever see it. These guys here could probably even be reduced below what they already are as far as polygon count. But even then, they are going to be kind of detail areas that no one's really going to pay too much attention to when they're further away from this object. So this could probably be reduced more. These guys here, because of the way that we've modeled them, they're symmetrical on both sides. So if we only modeled, or only give texture space to half of it and repeat that over to the other side, I think we'll find out that we could, double the amount of space we have for this. This may need to be, because of its odd shape, it may have to be cut in places in order to fit on our space a little bit better. Because right now you see just with the auto map, it's everywhere. But if we were to get rid of half of it and use the same UVs on both sides, what we would have here is it would take up even less space in this, take up half of the space. When it comes to this piece, go ahead and let's try to do a layout on this. Here we go. When it comes to this part of the sconce, if we were to use one side and duplicate it over 4 times, that means we could have each of these sections be 4 times as large as they are and take up a quarter of the space. So we could really put some nice detail into the faces of the sconce here that we'll actually be paying attention to, versus have it really reduced small, not being have any detail here. Okay, so what we're looking at is going to be something where we're going to be creating these UV islands. So in the case of our kind of tree, our connector piece, it's going to have 2 islands overlapping. Our back plate is going to be 1 island. We'll have 2 of those cylindrical bolt pieces, 1 cylinder at the top, 1 cylinder at the bottom, and then 4 of each one of our the top round. If we ended up doing this way, look how much smaller, okay, our areas will be. Okay, so we're reducing this by a quarter, loosening this by a quarter. These will still be 1-to-1. This can be doubled most likely, and then we'll have both sides of that. So what I want to do is get into the process of how we can do this. And the number one thing that we need to be doing is think about the model, kind of like we've already done with the sections here, as something that can be duplicated over or mirrored and then applied to our low poly. Okay, what we have actually set up here will work very, very well for doing the UV shells. The only issue might be with this face here, and the only reason I talk about that is we'd be putting a seam directly down the middle of the object, okay, versus the other way, which was we could put the seam along the corner of the object. Pluses, minuses, both ways. This may work better for a seam simply because there's not any roundness going on, but we would have mirroring going on at the main front face. So when we're looking at the wall sconce from the primary angle here, right, you could tell that there's mirroring going on from both sides, especially if we had, you know, a piece of damage or some stains or whatever it is. If we switch it to where each of these faces is mirrored, once we get past a 45-degree angle, we're seeing less and less of that face. So it's not facing towards us anymore, and once we get to 90, we can't even tell there's anything repeated. Okay, and it also eliminates the fact that we will not be able to see any of the back faces. So that being said, it may be more advantageous to have the front face have the primary UV layout versus having the seam with a seam down the corner versus having a seam down the middle. Okay, so what I've got is went ahead and made a super low model just so we can kind of look at our basic shapes of what we had. So we know this piece here, divide it right down the middle. We've already have half of it that we can use to work with. This piece here, it's got the back plate, it's going to have this. Most likely we'll just apply a planar UV, kind of unfold it a little bit, cut the back off of it so that it works real well. These cylinders here, they'll work real nice. Just cut them down one side, unroll them out flat. Same thing probably with this piece, except it's going to have a cap on the end here. We'll have to do something kind of interesting with. And then same thing with the piece up here where it has lots of those rings. We'll have to kind of split it in a couple of places, relax it a little bit, and it should bake out just fine. As far as our top and side pieces, again, I think if we just break them up by their faces, I think these will come out just fine. And what we can then do is, again, create it, duplicate it all the way around, and it'll work just fine as far as optimizing our texture space. All right. So here I'm just going to go real quick and take our model that we've reduced down and go ahead and break it down so that it's ready for us to just do our UVs on. So what I'm going to end up doing is make sure I've got all my transforms frozen. And just kind of delete all the extra geometry that I don't need, because again I only need 1/4 of these top faces. So just select all this stuff, delete it, get rid of all that, make sure my pivots again are centered, but also my pivot point is centered where I need it to be, because I need to make sure that I can reduplicate that back around like that. So go ahead, finish up the same thing on this back edge back here. Just kind of select, grow the selection. In this case, just select these strips, delete them. The bottom face, go ahead and make a division in it, I believe, to where it turned into a triangle. Yeah, right here. So in order to make it symmetrical, so let's go to multi-cut and to the middle, and then delete 3 out of the 4 faces. Get rid of all that. Make sure the pivot point stays right there where I can duplicate it around. Now this guy, Select that strip, delete it. Select that strip, delete it. Delete the sides off of that point. And you gotta do the top as well. Get rid of that. Make sure the pivot, is set up pretty well for it. Go ahead and do that massive reduce on this. Could have just done that by going to side mode, grabbing it and pulling it back, but this is just kind of a real quick way. Pull that back, select that loop, delete it. That'll be the low kind of test. If it doesn't look right, I've still got the copy of the other one. Let's make another edge loop here just to make it more quadded, less triangled. Just finding a few more little places where I think I can clean up a few edges here and there. Reduce some stuff down just a little bit. Again, sometimes what you'll find is that even though you've done a really good job doing a poly reduce or doing a really good job kind of bringing out what you can, there's always time to, or a chance sometimes to reduce, to try to look at things one more time. In this case, yeah, I could get rid of those, but I think I'm losing a little bit. It's starting to get a lot of a wobble. So I'm going to undo that, put those edges back in. This bit here, on the other hand, I can pull that up, delete that ring, as I really don't need those edges there. You're never going to see that little inner bevel. So